April 16th, 1944, Anzio, Italy. The dawn came soft, almost beautiful. A pale sun rose over the sea, brushing the wheat fields in gold. For a moment, even the soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division believed the rumors that the front was quiet today. They were wrong. At 07:20, the first shell fell, then another, and another. The world turned to dust and thunder. The earth convulsed, throwing men and helmets into the air. A machine gun burst tore through the smoke. Screams cut across the wind. The calm Italian morning had vanished, replaced by a storm of metal and chaos. When the noise settled, the survivors found themselves trapped in a crater, half filled with smoke and dirt. 10 men, bleeding, disoriented, surrounded by the smell of burnt powder and the sharp taste of fear. Their radio operator lay motionless beside the shattered transmitter. The only sound left was the shallow breathing of the wounded. Corporal David Lane pressed his face against the mud, trying to stay conscious. His helmet was gone, his hands shaking. Somewhere behind him, someone groaned. "Medic, please." But there were no medics coming. Lane turned his head and saw movement. A blur of brown fur crawling closer through the smoke. It was Rex. Rex was a shepherd mix, half German, half collie trained in the U.S. Army's Dogs for Defense program. He had landed with the 45th Division in Sicily, marched through Salerno, and survived every campaign so far. To the men, he was more than a mascot. He was a brother. Lane had slept beside him in foxholes, shared his rations, and trusted that instinct more than any compass. Rex could sense danger before anyone else, and right now, his hackles were raised, eyes locked on the ridge. Above them, mortar crews were adjusting their aim. Each shell landed closer. The next would be inside the crater. Lane knew they were finished. The radio was gone. The signalers dead. They had no way to call for help. He looked at Rex, the only thing still moving with purpose. The dog met his gaze, panting, waiting. Lane grabbed a small message tube from his belt, a leftover from the early days of the campaign. He tore a page from his notebook, his hands trembling. He wrote, "Platoon 9 pinned. Heavy casualties. Need smoke cover and evacuation. Coordinates below." He stuffed the note inside, sealed the cap, and clipped the tube to Rex's collar. Then he knelt low and whispered, voice shaking, "Go, boy, go home." Rex tilted his head, confused. Another shell whistled overhead. Lane shouted, "Go!" Rex leapt from the crater. Bullets cracked through the air. The field exploded behind him, the blast lifting him off the ground. He tumbled, rolled, and somehow kept running. He sprinted low through the wheat, weaving between flames, smoke curling around him like ghosts. His paws tore through the mud, muscles straining, lungs screaming for air. Every 20 yards, he dropped to his belly, crawling forward when the shooting paused, sprinting again when it started. On the ridge, American sentries watching through binoculars saw a shape moving through the chaos. At first, they thought it was debris. Then someone shouted, "It's a dog! It's the message dog!" Rex was almost there. The last 100 yards were open ground. No cover. No hope. Machine guns raked the field. One bullet grazed his shoulder. Another struck near his paw, throwing up dirt. He stumbled, slid, but didn't stop. He ran like something more than animal, like instinct, like fate itself. When he finally reached the trench, soldiers ducked aside as he tumbled in, covered in ash and blood. He barked once hoarse, desperate, and collapsed at their feet. The sergeant tore the message tube from his collar, read the note aloud. Pinned at grid 327B, casualties, need smoke. Within minutes, mortars launched white phosphorus shells, laying thick clouds of smoke across the field. Armored carriers roared forward through the haze. Under the cover of smoke, medics reached the crater. 7 men still breathing. They pulled them out, one by one. By the time they reached the command post, the field behind them was nothing but craters, and Rex was gone. Hours later, as dusk fell, Lane sat outside a medic tent. His arm was bandaged, his uniform black with soot. He stared at the horizon, whispering to no one, "Come back, boy. Please come back." Then, from the far end of the camp, a bark faint, broken. Lane stood, stumbling forward. A medic called out, "You looking for the dog?" Rex lay on a stretcher, wrapped in a torn blanket, his breathing ragged but steady. Someone had found him near the trench, unconscious but alive. Lane knelt beside him, resting his hand on the dog's side. Rex opened one eye, tail twitching once. "You did it," Lane whispered. "You really did it." The tent was silent, except for the soft rustle of gauze and the distant echo of artillery far away. But for those few men who watched, it felt like time had stopped. A single living thing reminding them that loyalty still meant something in a world gone mad. Outside, the sky burned red as the sun set over Anzio. The guns had gone quiet again, and somewhere in that silence, a wounded dog dreamed not of war, but of home. The night after the rescue smelled of iron and rain. Inside the field hospital, lanterns flickered against canvas walls, throwing ghostly shadows over the wounded. Outside, the wind carried the echo of distant shell fire, a reminder that even miracles bled in wartime. On the last cot in the corner lay Rex. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Patches of fur were burned away, his left paw wrapped in gauze. Corporal David Lane sat beside him, uniform still stiff with soot. Every few minutes, he reached out, making sure the heartbeat was still there. The surgeon passed behind him and murmured, "Lucky animal." Lane shook his head. "Not luck, sir, loyalty." The doctor said nothing. He'd seen too many men die to argue about faith. Dawn crept over Anzio like smoke. A gray sun climbed through the mist, revealing a camp that had survived another night. Men limped between tents. Someone brewed coffee strong enough to burn the air, and somewhere amid the noise, Rex stirred. Lane looked up as the dog's head lifted weakly. "Easy, boy. Take it slow." Rex's tail brushed once against the cot, then twice. By midday, he was standing shaky, defiant like a soldier refusing to fall. The medics laughed and called it impossible. But everyone who'd watched him run through gunfire already knew impossible didn't mean much anymore. Word spread across the division faster than artillery news. The dog from Platoon 9, the runner, the messenger of Anzio. Soldiers came by in twos and threes to see him offering biscuits, bits of bacon, a pat on the head. For a moment, the war paused inside that tent. They smiled again, but bureaucracy has no heart for legends. 2 officers arrived from headquarters with clipboards and dry expressions. They asked when the message was sent, the exact coordinates, the duration of mortar fire. One finally said, "Corporal Lane, are you certain the dog crossed under active fire?" No embellishment. Lane stared at him. "Sir, he's still bleeding. Does that look like embellishment to you?" The man coughed, wrote something, and left. Rex sneezed, unimpressed. A week later, orders came down. The platoon would move again. The front was shifting north toward the Italian mountains, and there was no time to rest. Lane packed his kit, hesitated, and looked at Rex. "You ready?" Rex barked once low. Steady, confident. He limped, but he followed. They advanced through vineyards and ruined farmhouses, fields of silent scarecrows, the earth still hiding unexploded shells. Every step felt like borrowed time. By noon, the column reached an abandoned village, cracked windows, bullet holes, a church bell hanging crooked. The silence was wrong, too complete. Lane crouched, scanning the street. Rex froze beside him, nose twitching. Then, a low growl. "Ambush!" Lane yelled. Machine gun fire erupted from the rooftops. Bullets tore shingles apart, ricocheted off stone. Men dropped behind carts. Returning fire. Through the chaos, Lane saw 2 German soldiers racing toward a mortar tube beside the bell tower. He turned to signal his squad, but Rex was already gone. The dog sprinted through debris, a brown blur against gray stone. He lunged, knocking one soldier flat. The man screamed as the mortar shell rolled harmlessly into the dirt. The second soldier spun, raising his rifle too slow. Lane fired. The shot cracked, echoing down the street. When the smoke cleared, the squad moved in. 1 enemy captured alive, 1 dead, the mortar intact. Sergeant O'Donnell clapped Lane's shoulder, laughing breathlessly. "Hell, that mutt's got more guts than any of us." Lane looked down. Rex stood over the captured soldier, teeth bared but eyes steady. No bloodlust, just duty. He's not a mutt, Lane said quietly. He's one of us. That night, the men camped on the hillside above the shattered village. The air smelled of pine and smoke, the stars faint behind drifting clouds. They sat around a small fire, passing a canteen, trading stories. When the laughter faded, silence returned, the kind only soldiers know. Lane broke it first. You think he knows what he did? Private Harris shrugged. Maybe he just knows we're alive. Maybe that's enough. Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name, tail thumping lazily against the ground. Lane reached over, scratched behind his ear. Good boy. The dog sighed, resting his head on Lane's boot. Above them, thunder rumbled in the distance, not weather, but artillery far away. The war was moving north, but for one brief night, the world felt safe again. In the following months, Rex became a legend, whispered from trench to trench. Soldiers claimed he could sense incoming shells seconds before they landed. Others swore he barked warnings that saved entire patrols. Nobody knew what was truth or myth anymore, and it didn't matter. Because on battlefields where faith was a dying thing, Rex gave men something to believe in. A war correspondent eventually caught the story. His article began, "There were many heroes at Anzio. Most wore helmets. One wore fur." The story spread through newspapers back home. Mothers sent letters addressed simply to Rex, somewhere in Italy. The Army Postal Service actually delivered them. By the summer of 1945, the guns finally fell silent. The beaches of Anzio grew quiet again, the craters filling with grass. Rex walked beside Lane on the long road to Rome, limping slightly, muzzle gray. Every mile behind them was a memory of someone who hadn't made it. Every step forward was a promise that they would never forget. When the column halted at a crossroads, Lane looked down at his companion. "You tired yet?" Rex looked up, tail wagging once. No, not yet. They kept walking, side by side. Two soldiers, one human, one not, but both carrying the same invisible weight. The guns stopped. After years of thunder, the silence felt unreal, too clean, too cruel. Across Italy, soldiers packed their gear and counted the faces that would never come home. Among them walked Corporal David Lane, his pack lighter than it had ever been, and beside him, the same faithful shadow, Rex. The war was over, but peace. Peace was a stranger. September 1945, Naples Harbor. The docks swarmed with tired heroes and rusted steel. The sea smelled of diesel and ghosts. Lane and Rex boarded the Liberty ship Trenton Star. The deck groaned under the weight of men who couldn't believe they were leaving hell behind. Rex stood close to the rail, wind combing through the scars in his fur. The sky ahead was blue, the kind of blue no battlefield ever knew. Lane crouched beside him. "That's home out there. Boy, you earned it." Rex pressed his muzzle against the man's hand and sighed. No cheers, no music, just the sound of waves against steel as Europe faded behind them. When the train rolled into a small station outside Columbus, the war finally felt far away. The platform smelled of rain and cut grass instead of gunpowder. Children pointed, a woman whispered, "That's the dog from the newspaper." Reporters snapped photographs. The dog who ran through hell. But Rex didn't pose. He hid behind Lane's legs, uneasy with applause that sounded too much like shell fire. That night, they reached the Lane family farm. No banners, no band, just a porch light left burning. Lane's mother cried when she saw him. His father shook his hand like greeting a ghost. Rex circled once in the yard, sniffed the soil, then lay down as if he'd finally found something solid. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. The envelope bore the War Department seal. Commendation for gallantry in action. To Canine Soldier Rex, 45th Infantry Division. Lane laughed out loud. He clipped the ribbon to Rex's worn collar and said, "Looks good on you, partner." For a day, the small town celebrated. The local paper printed his picture beside the headline. Hero Dog awarded Silver Star. But at the Pentagon, pens scratched quietly. Medals were for men, not animals. Regulations were clear. A week later, another letter. Short, cold. All decorations awarded to non-human service members are hereby revoked. No explanation, no ceremony. Lane folded the paper and put it away. Then he looked at Rex, sleeping on the porch. They can keep their medals. We know what you did. The months passed slowly. Rex adjusted to quiet life herding chickens instead of dodging mortars. But sometimes, when a truck backfired, he'd flinch and run for the barn. Some nights, he'd sit by the window and stare at the horizon, waiting for a call that would never come. Lane understood. He had the same dreams, the same sound of guns that wouldn't go quiet in his head. Yet there were good days too. Children from neighboring farms came to play. Rex let them climb onto his back, gentle as a guardian. Lane sometimes sat on the steps, watching the dog chase fireflies in the evening light. For a moment, war felt like a story someone else had lived. Winter 1946 arrived with ice in the air. On a gray morning, Lane opened the door and found Rex curled on the porch, motionless, a thin frost on his fur. He had died in his sleep. Lane sat beside him for a long time before moving. No tears at first, just the hollow quiet of a man losing the only being who truly understood him. He buried Rex under the old maple tree behind the barn. On the collar, he left the faded ribbon and the small metal message tube that had once carried a platoon's hope. A wooden sign marked the spot. Rex, he did his duty. No trumpets, no salutes, just the wind through the branches and a single dog tag clinking in the cold. 70 years passed. New wars came. New names filled the medals. But some stories refused to die. In 2018, at a small ceremony in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Army posthumously awarded Rex the Medal of Bravery, the highest honor for an animal in service. A modern military dog stood on stage, representing him. An old man, David Lane's grandson, accepted the plaque. He read from his grandfather's diary. He didn't know what war was. He just knew we needed him. The audience stood in silence. Some cried quietly, outside, in the distant hills of Italy. The wheat fields had grown back, and somewhere beneath that earth, the ghost of a dog still runs through smoke and fire, ears pinned back, heart forward, still delivering his message. History remembers the generals, the orders, the maps, but in every war, there are quiet souls who choose to run toward the sound of fear, not away from it. Rex was one of them. He didn't fight for flags or medals. He fought for the man who called his name. And in that simple act, he showed us the purest kind of courage,